You can't be serious, man. You cannot be serious!
All right. Let me get, there we go. With the thumping, sweaty grind of the opening 20-second clip, here we are. It's myself and my man, the dog father, Mr. Al Dawg. What's going on, brother?
It's the Al Diggity Dog, also known as the Al Illuminati, here live on Sirius Sports. I'm glad we could pull this off because Rob's been moving around all day. He hooked up his phone as a hotspot, and we're able to broadcast my personal favorite show of the week. I can't wait to get into it. We got a lot to talk about.
We certainly do. We got Mark Matheny in the audience here. And let me just put Mark's comment up. Hey, between Colorado, the 49ers, Dolphins, and Browns, we look pretty smart. We were all over all of them, right?
Yeah.
All of them. We had
well, I'd one-up you on that, Mark. I think Mark made some prediction, or it might have been you, Rob, about Aaron Rodgers and his knees, particularly on opening night. Aaron Rodgers just suffered an injury. It looks like it could be a knee injury. Doesn't look that serious, but he is currently out of our Monday night football game between the New York Jets, interesting on this particular date, and the Buffalo Bills. So that might have been the call of the decade if he turns out to be correct.
Yeah, absolutely. And all four of those teams that Mark was referencing, we lined them up. We looked at Tua. We looked at Mike McDaniel in the Dolphins franchise, and they were just all aligned. We did the same thing with Brock Purdy and Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers. There was that straight column alignment. And then Mark, to his credit, was kind of all over the Browns. And I'm not the biggest Deshaun Watson guy, not because he likes the rub and tug, but because I don't think he's a very good quarterback. That's a whole other discussion. But Deshaun, I always thought it was interesting, too, that Deshaun Watson, the Virgo, would go to a massage therapist for sex, right? Like it kind of fits. You know, I'll bring my towel. You can rub me down. You can tug me down. And, you know, I'm going to get my rocks off in a masseuse setting, which is very Virgoan.
Well, it is Virgoan, right? Because there's something to do with Virgo and touch, particularly hand touch. Am I right?
Right. He's going to obviously these are IG masseuses. So that's really where he found these women. They were on IG, and they said that they actually did, sports massage, healing massage, whatever. Right. So it wasn't look like he was going to, Hans, doing the deep Swedish tissue thing, right? No, he was definitely, going through the portfolio to see who he liked. And apparently he brought all of his own stuff with him, his own towel. And, he was very Virgoan about the whole thing. It was because that's what a Virgo would do. They'd want to be in control of the whole process, and then have this therapeutic thing, which is very Virgo, turn into a total release for himself. I mean, look, I don't know what happened between those four walls. A lot of times women will be into it until they're not. And then if there's a payday involved, they'll go after it. But I mean, Deshaun, you hire escorts for a reason. You make a shit ton of money. Just hire your escort, have them come over, tell them to do a little, chop suey on your back, and then take care of you, right? Instead of force feeding the issue with these women. I don't know. But it was a very Virgoan thing for him to do.
Yeah, I think Deshaun sucks. I think he sucks as a quarterback. I think he's an uncharismatic person. I've never liked the guy. But if things astrologically align for the Browns, bet on them because I don't want to see them do well. Even if I financially did well with them, it wouldn't be the same just because I can't find myself rooting for them. Go ahead. They've always just kind of been so mediocre in every sense of the word The Dolphins, they had a great week 1. Okay. So did the Falcons, which was another Mark pick. I placed a position on the Dolphins and the Falcons. Why not? Because it's a very, very good upside if those two are in the Super Bowl. But yeah, we got a lot to talk about, man. We got Colorado. We had a great week of college football. We have the opening week of the NFL. We got to talk about prime time Neon Dion's chart, his goods and his bads. He's kind of an ignorant guy sometimes, but he's a very prideful, charismatic person that is really taking advantage of the current landscape of college football, which is it's changing fast, and it's changing in a way that some of the superpowers of yesterday, specifically Alabama, who lost this past week to Texas, are sort of having trouble adjusting to this new period, almost this new period of NIL and transfer. But other than that, it's a beautiful world to be in the wide world of sports.
Well, it was really interesting that Duke knocked off Clemson,
Yeah.
and then I guess this last week Duke got beat. Like, I mean, didn't they get kind of torched this last weekend?
I'm not sure about that. Duke.
I think they're 1-1 now. That's what it was like. Oh, really? You beat Clemson, and then I think the follow-up game was really unremarkable. If I'm not,
No. They won big. They
Oh,
won
they
big
did.
September 9th against Lafayette. So
Oh,
Duke's undefeated right now, and Duke has a very, very good quarterback. He's very mobile. I'm very impressed with him so far. But what we're seeing right now with Duke in particular, but also North Carolina, who's also 2-0, these are perennial ACC basketball powers that, in my view, are the prototypical school to benefit from the NIL because they have the branding power, they have the institutional power, and they've been professional in basketball for a while. Now they're poised to make their name in the ACC, which is going to be called, in my view, and from what I've been hearing, it's going to be called the All Coast Conference. And I do think we're going to see more West Coast teams join the All Coast Conference. And, the ACC is loaded with football. Miami upset Texas A&M, and Florida State and USC are the two teams right now that are just absolutely whooping ass, and people haven't been able to compete with them. Florida State blew out LSU, kicked their ass on national television. Texas just beat Alabama. The SEC is not this global superpower that it's been made out to be. The ACC and the Pac-12, in their last year of life, the Pac-12 is making a name for themselves, as is the ACC and the Big 12 for that matter. So it's fun to watch, and it's going to be a crazy NFL season. And I want to talk to you about something, right? There's a huge bifurcation between college football fans and NFL fans. I watch a little NFL, but for the most part, I just see it as so much more like controlled and rigged than college football. What's your opinion on that?
Well, it's an interesting question. I didn't watch the Niner game, but I kind of followed it, and they're right before halftime. There's a statistic that if a team is down by more than 20 points at halftime, that they will lose like 35% of their viewership.
Wow.
Okay, so keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Now, the 49ers were beating the Steelers 20-0 at halftime, and they had like a bullshit penalty on Diamador Lenore, who was on the sidelines. He wasn't even in the game. And they called this penalty on him, some sort of bizarre, unsportsmanlike penalty to keep the drive alive. So just before halftime, Pittsburgh scored to make the score 20-7. Now, if you put that into the NFL's algorithm, there's going to those people that would have seen that game as 20-0 versus 20-7 and a 13-point wedge between the two teams. They would have probably laughed. But the NFL is keenly aware of statistics like this. And so the only touchdown of the game that Pittsburgh got, which for all intents and purposes was a real gimme, had to do with officials getting involved before halftime. So to your point, Al, I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah. So with the NFL, man, that's why I always have my futures picks reflective of some sort of narrative, because I think even Aaron Rodgers' injury tonight, to me, it's suspect because it's just like, it reeks of like a narrative. I don't want to say a script, but a narrative. This is how I view the NFL, man. Pass interference and holding are two ways in which you can steer a game any which way you want. And let's say hypothetically, Rob, you and I are NFL referees, right? And we've been reffing the same guys roughly for the last 2 to 5 years. We know the rules stone cold like the back of our hand. If you and I are reffing this game, can we push it how we want? And I think the answer is yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And
I think within means it can be pushed.
okay.
Within means. Southwest Florida real estate with Lewis. By the way, a lot of Florida State love in chat tonight. Is DeMar Hamlin still playing? The answer to that right now is no. He has not returned to the playing field. So DeMar Hamlin is still sidelined, whoever DeMar Hamlin is or was. So there's the answer to that.
That was peak bizarre. That whole episode was just so peak bizarre, man.
Very strange.
Yeah.
So my feeling about the NFL is that there are so many variables involved now, like huge variables. Of course, you have the gambling variable, which changes everything. And if you don't think it changes everything, it completely does. We went over a couple scenarios before where during COVID, there should have been bets that were taken off the books, like when Denver had no starting quarterback and they let that game happen. Like that, somebody was making easy money off that game, even if the odds were really, were really high, or you had to bet a lot to win a lot. That was the game you wanted to bet a lot. I mean, if you had big money and went in when Denver had no starting quarterback, I mean, that game shouldn't have been allowed on the books. So I think once you bring gambling into the mix, there's a huge variable involved. That's number one. And number two, this whole idea of narratives, which comes up with things like, WWE wrestling. And there was a guy by the name of Tui. I forget his first name. What's his first name? James, or I used to have him on my show. He's written a couple books on gambling and sports. So I had him on as kind of a semi-regular guest. And he really went into it. And one of the things that he found, which is a really important little piece of literature that is on the back of every single NFL ticket stub, it says for entertainment purposes only. That's it, right? So when you buy that ticket and you are walking through that turnstile, it is for entertainment purposes only. And it's a blanket statement that basically says we can do whatever we want to push this narrative whatever way we want to, because that's what we need and that's what we want for our sports. Jason Whitlaw calls the NFL the greatest reality show on television.
Yeah.
And I would agree with that. Now, bringing it back to tonight with Aaron Rodgers and him getting hurt, how would that suit the NFL? I mean, I would think, and I'd love your opinion on this. They're just coming off of Hard Knocks, and which is a lot of hype and a lot of marketing for the NFL. And I would think that the NFL would want the star of Hard Knocks to actually be in this game so that people could watch the game and kind of continue that role, especially with New York City. You got a bunch of eyeballs in New York City, huge, right? Not only is it New York City, but you have upstate New York, you have Buffalo. So you're pulling in all these East Coast viewers. If I was the NFL, I'd want Aaron Rodgers in that game. But he's not. So I think this is probably more of a real injury than the powers that be jumping in. What are your thoughts about that?
So I think that it's a very long season, and I don't think this is a serious injury. I think that having him injured adds drama. It adds a wrinkle. And let's not forget, when Tom Brady, got his first start with the Patriots, it was on September 26th. It wasn't until, 3 or 4 games into the season. So we got to remember, what is it? It's 17 total games now, correct? So it's 18 total weeks. We got a ways to go. And I do think that, it is probably an organic injury. Although if any of you guys, and I think we might want to take a look at this, because I was thinking about this, as soon as the Aaron Rodgers injury occurred. Have you guys ever seen the Paul Pierce injury when he dramatically, it was during the NBA playoffs where he dramatically exits the court and he's like being carried off the court, like crying. And then he comes back and jogs back out onto the court and makes this miraculous comeback. And they go on to do very well. That to me was just reeking of some sort of storyline or some sort of, initiation. I don't know what you want to call it. Now, with Aaron's injury, I did watch the replay. It's not like a jarring injury. It's kind of like just, a large man sort of landed on top of him. It may have been awkward. I personally think it just adds a wrinkle. It adds drama. It adds a little something. So from the storyline narrative sense, I understand why it would be beneficial for him to be in the game, but I think it's actually more beneficial for him to come back maybe week 3 or 4, and maybe there's a quarterback controversy. Maybe this kid Wilson plays well. You know what I'm saying? So I think it just adds a drama wrinkle, if you will. So that's my take on it. But I really do believe that it was either you or Mark who said something specific about Aaron Rodgers and knees.
Well, I think it was kind of a group thing, but I was talking about Aaron Rodgers and knees and Sagittarius.
Right.
And Mark had brought it up, but not that I'm sitting here taking credit for it, but that's where I was going with it. Because if there was going to be something with Aaron Rodgers, it would be the knee. Of course, that's what went down. I'm trying to look at his chart and like where things are tonight. So we have Mars at 10 Libra, and he has Mars at 8 Libra in his chart. So he's actually just gone through his Mars return, which is kind of interesting. Probably would have been better if he'd played yesterday, but I don't think that would necessarily have a huge impact in his injury. Let me see what else. Let me just go through this here. I'm going to go back through a couple of these aspects. We have Mercury retrograde at 9 Virgo. And so he has Mercury retrograde at 9. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to bring his chart up here, and we could make a case for this just in terms of how astrology works. Maybe this is what we were picking up on in some ways. All right, so here's his chart right here. Here's his sun at 10 degrees Uranus, and then he has 10 degrees Sagittarius. Then he has Uranus at 9 degrees Sagittarius. So it's a Sun-Uranus conjunction. First of all, nobody's going to tell Aaron Rodgers what to do. Nobody. He is kind of the ultimate rebel, and he knows a lot. Aaron Rodgers is actually a really smart guy. He's got a wide conjunction with Mercury and Jupiter. There isn't a lot that Aaron Rodgers probably hasn't seen on a football field and maybe in life. Now, chugging beer is not one of his strong suits. But besides that, now we have Mercury down here, and Mercury's retrograde at 9, right? So if we were to take Mercury, and it's at 9 degrees, 5 minutes, 2 seconds. So that Mercury is in a square with his Sun and in an exact square with his Uranus. So if we wanted to make a case for Mercury retrograde injury, looking at Aaron Rodgers, it's right there, right? Because Mercury is mobility. And then in his chart, we have a hard angle, right? Square, 90 degrees, mutable sign. So it's mutable. So probably be back. It's not like it's in a fixed sign. So let's say, for instance, he had something going on with Pluto, right? Let's say it was something with, I don't know, a Leo transit with Pluto. That could be problematic, but it wouldn't affect his knees because Sagittarius rules the knees, the thighs and the knees, right? That's Sagittarius. The shins on down, like thighs and knees are Sag, knees to shins are Capricorn. You get to the ankles and they're Aquarius. So there you go. I think we have an astrological explanation for what went down with Aaron Rodgers.
Mm-hmm. So just to brief the viewers, and I like to be totally transparent with some of my predictions, just with our viewers here. So I picked the Jets to win the Super Bowl because of narrative. I think that Aaron Rodgers will be at the forefront of the legalization of psychedelic drugs. And I think that past shows he's been on. He already has the resume for it. Okay. So he did ayahuasca, came back, won MVP, taught it on the Aubrey Marcus podcast, who I think is the cringe captain of the internet, that man. And Rogan, who is another, this bizarre elf creature, Joe. And so he's been on those shows, talking about the wonders of his experience, whatever. It doesn't matter how you feel, how I feel about those particular, substances or how they might benefit or not benefit the general public. That's happening. And it seems to be happening. The narrative is there for it to happen. Just like what we saw with marijuana, it got culturally legalized before it became officially legalized. And I anticipate the same thing will happen with psychedelics. And I do believe if I was a social engineer, I want Aaron Rodgers at the forefront of it. I think he's perfect for that role. And so my pick for Super Bowl has been the Jets. And it's not because of anything astrological, although I do think that plays a huge role. And it's not because of football. It's because of narrative. And I think that when we look at the Aeons of Football episode that we did, it's this question, this quantum question. Is it the times that reflect these champions? Is it the consciousness of the public that reflects the champions? Or do the champions, the Super Bowl champions, affect the consciousness of the masses? And if I am a social engineer, hypothetically, would I want certain champions in place to affect the consciousness of the masses? I think these are interesting questions.
Yeah, no, I think they are. Like, I think that you're asking the age-old question, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Right? Is it the collective forces that drive the sport?
Right.
Or does the sport drive the collective forces? I think you could make a case for either.
Right.
I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, it's an interesting thing to bring up, this whole idea of psychedelics and theogens.
It's very Aquarian. Would you agree with that?
Well,
it's sort of an Aquarian age thing.
It is very Aquarian, but it's also very anti-football in a lot of ways.
It is.
Right? Yeah. It's very, very, very. I mean, there were players in the 1960s that turned on, tuned in, and dropped out. Right. There was Chip Oliver, who played for the St. Louis Cardinals, Dave Megacy, who played for the Oakland Raiders. These are two guys that went down that path, and they just turned their back on pro football. They said, I'm sort of done with it. There was this really interesting guy who played for the New York Giants, and I think he played for the Eagles. His name was Joe Don Looney, and he was just crazy. He was like he was like John Riggins 1.0. And Joe Don Looney eventually left the NFL and went to India, right, to go on that sort of spiritual quest that Ram Dass and all these other people had. So it's not like we haven't been here before, but the 60s clearly were, in terms of the NFL, when we went over the Packers, they were there to drive home a certain narrative, which was America, the Heart Belt, the Greenland, sort of the agriculture, the breadbasket of the United States, and all those values. And they were selling a lot of those values because of the Vietnam War, right? They needed to have those values in place. They needed to have God, country, and flag in order for that war to be sold. So football was a very big part of it. Right. And of course, Vince Lombardi comes out of the Jesuit school. He went to Fordham University. And if you're going to have somebody sell your sport, Vince Lombardi was so popular that Richard Nixon wanted him as his vice presidential candidate.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's how popular it was.
Wow.
But Lombardi was a Kennedy Democrat. He wanted nothing to do with Nixon. So I mean, now if we're looking at this kind of narrative, right? So that we've been in this decade for 3 years now. We're in our third decade of the 2020s, and I think we're still trying to define a very undefined decade in a lot of ways. We started the decade off with no time. We were really out of time.
Yeah.
We started, and then we've kind of, went on our way back to these things like, well, football starts in September. There's a Thursday night game, right? There are all these sort of cultural sort of markers in time that are there, but they feel kind of arbitrary in some ways because something happened, Like there were like in ufology. You ever follow ufology and this whole thing with missing time? Are you familiar with that whole concept?
I'm familiar with you talking about this specifically within regards to 2020, and there was sort of a no time, if you will, period where
Yeah.
things got fucked up, specifically sports. That's when, the normies, and I mean, for lack of a better term, they started freaking out once fucking March Madness got canceled, right? That then it became very, very a
It
big
took
deal.
everybody off their
Yeah,
event calendar, right?
right,
Like, so in ufology, there's this concept called missing time, and it's when people believe that they were picked up or abducted
right.
by extraterrestrials, right?
Yeah,
And there's a certain amount of time that has taken place that they can't account for, right? So it's called missing time. And
right,
it feels like in some ways we have our own cultural version of missing time. Like there was a part of our lives and our reality was completely abducted. And the things that we do on a normal basis, we weren't able to participate in. And then we got dropped back into this kind of so-called time cycle. But just like these people who've been theoretically abducted, it's like, where did that time go? Right? There's something that they can't account for. And there's this kind of gap in their experience. And I feel like we have that gap in our experience too. And we can go on thinking like, well, everything's just fine. And we have football and we have these cultural markers, but something's not right. Right. Something is definitely off.
yeah,
And, I'm not sure. Let me just say this and then
yeah,
I'll hand you the mic back.
yeah.
I feel like that this missing time factor is part of this decade now. And this decade is TBD, to be determined. And if we bring it up and blow it up into the larger picture, we're 7 years away from 2030. And that's really the big time marker is 2030, Agenda 2030. So, could it be the decade of entheogens? Could it be the decade where instead of you watching Monday Night Football, you put on a biosensor helmet and you become one of the players, right? That's not
Right.
out of the question.
Right, it's not. Okay. That's
Yeah,
interesting. So,
yeah.
you mentioned ufology, and I kinda wanna bounce off of that and kinda add to that conversation here. And let's put our Illuminati social engineer helmets on, right? And let's say, hypothetically, we wanted to pull off Project Bluebeam, right? I don't think it's something you could have done in the 50s. Definitely not in the 60s or 70s, because people were more with it in a sense. People were less out to lunch. Now, in order for us to pull off Project Bluebeam, we're going to want a pretty fucked up general public. And if we wanted to do that, I think that having more psychedelic drugs available to the masses would be a key step in pulling off something like Project Bluebeam. So that's kind of where I'm going with this in terms of, the Jets and potentially Aaron Rodgers being used as a mascot to usher something into the masses to basically fuck up the general public even more. And with that public, you can pull some shit. You can pull Agenda 2030. You could pull off something like Bluebeam with a population that's discombobulated. So that's sort of my thinking, and I want to get your take on that.
We got a Lions fan in the house right here.
I like the Lions. Lions kicked ass. Lions beat the Chiefs. That was
I was a
excellent.
Lions fan when I was a kid.
Cool.
Don't ask me how I got there. I grew up in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
So what you're talking about is Brave New World, right?
Mhm.
That's what you're talking about. You're talking about the new Soma. And here's my thoughts about Aaron Rodgers. I think the minute Aaron Rodgers feels like he's become a spokesperson for a movement, he's done.
He's
Based
done.
on he's done. He won't do it.
Okay, he won't do that.
Yeah.
Okay, I can see what you're saying there, because there was a time period when the American right wanted him to be their champion in regards to Bologna virus agenda, and he was like, "Nah, fuck that." So I see what you're
Aaron
saying.
Rodgers, you cannot tell him what to do. Like there was a period, like right around sort of crest of the wave, Black Lives Matter.
Okay.
Aaron Rodgers was kind of a lip, right?
Yep.
I remember him. There was this one TV commercial, And I forget it was like, who cares what the product was? The product was the influencers. And it was all these people that were sitting at a table. And there were three faces that I remember standing out at that table. One was Pharrell, the other was Snoop Dogg, and another was Aaron Rodgers. Kim Kardashian could have been there. It was all these influencers. I forget what the product was. Like, that's where Aaron Rodgers was right around that time. And that's not where he is now. And he came out, clearly against the vax, and he said that he was. What did you say? He wasn't. He was treated.
He was for body autonomy. I remember that was his line.
Yeah, and he went on Rogan, and he was on with McAfee a lot, and I think Rodgers is with that Sun Uranus conjunction. I just think he's anti-establishment. Right. So wherever the establishment is going, he's not there. So if the establishment was Trump and the so-called right, then Aaron Rodgers showing up on a commercial with Pharrell and all these people makes sense. And then when the narrative switches and flips, and they want everybody to lock down and vax up and give up your body autonomy rights, Aaron Rodgers flips again. So I don't think he's really that controllable. If they want somebody, to sell entheogens as the new Soma, I think they should go find another guy.
Well, okay. I'm going to say this. As an Illuminati, guy, just thinking right here like a social engineer, there's the establishment and then there's the not so obvious establishment, right? So currently, you have your obvious establishment with your Bidens, your Clintons, where so many people get caught up is within the not so obvious establishment, your Trumps, your Joe Rogans, your Elon Musks. Okay. These people present themselves as counter to the establishment, but in reality, they're not so obvious establishments. So, okay, I see what you're saying totally in terms of Aaron Rodgers being not so obvious establishment. I mean, being against the obvious establishment. That's part of his personality.
I just think that astrologically, he's not wired that way.
Okay. I mean, what I'm saying is I could see him getting caught up within the not so obvious establishment, thinking he's, fighting the establishment. You know what I'm saying?
Maybe. Here's what I think. I think if whatever suit of clothes he wears gets too tight, he's out of it. That's what I think. I mean, he's got a Sun Uranus conjunction in his chart. That's
tell me more about that though, because I'm still.
Uranus is the ruler of Aquarius, right? And we know Aquarius is a rebellious sign. It's a cool sign. Aquarians are cool, right? But there's always that you run into that invisible fence with Aquarians. They're cool up to a point, and when you hit their cause button or their cause switch, all of a sudden they're not as cool. Like all of a sudden, wow, you're pretty hot about that, aren't you? Yeah. Well, this is I firmly believe that people need this as their daily bread or whatever, right? Aquarians, will have their causes, and they're fine until you get to their invisible fence. When you hit their invisible fence, you know where they stand on things. Sometimes it could take a ways to get there, but eventually you'll get there. I guarantee you. Yeah. So he's not an Aquarian, but he has a Sun Uranus conjunction. Here, I'll bring his chart up again so we can see it, and I can show it to you, and you can see what's going on with Mr. Rodgers. Okay, here's his sun right there, right? Circle. This is the symbol for Aquarius, and they are right on top of each other. Yeah. Right. Like this is 1 degree, and he's not somebody like if you think of Sagittarius as a horse, and you want to corral a horse. Yeah. He's not easy to corral. He's not easy to corral.
Right.
This is a guy who, when it feels like he's being manipulated or he feels like he's being used, he'll go in the other direction. I mean, he's kind of wired that way, and he's got a wide conjunction with Jupiter, so he wants to continue to expand and grow and see what's on kind of the other side of the horizon. I don't think he's easily programmable. Now, when you get into things like drugs, you're talking about Neptune and you're talking about Pluto. So he has this Neptune-Mercury conjunction. And I think, to your point, Al, that could be a bit of a blind spot. right? That's where I think he could kind of get into trouble. So, for instance, if he hangs out with Aubrey Marcus and this, what was that chick's name, Blue or whatever her name was, right?
Yeah.
His psychedelic magical muse.
Right.
He could have a bit of a blind spot here with the Neptune Mercury conjunction. And, I think ultimately he's somebody that wants to believe in something, right? Like Sagittarius can also be the true believer.
Yeah.
But with Neptune here, the belief systems will dissolve. And Sagittarius is really connected to systems and belief systems. I don't know if you've ever talked about Bruce Lee, but Bruce Lee is a Sagittarius, right? And when you follow Bruce Lee's arc in terms of martial arts, he starts off with Kung Fu, Gung Fu, and then he goes into Jeet Kune Do. And every time he makes a change, it's a way for him to move away from a particular system until you get to the movie Game of Death, right? And Game of Death is the ultimate sort of treatise on Sagittarius, because as Bruce Lee moves through every level of the tower in the Game of Death, he takes on somebody that has a different system. And so he has to incorporate their system and then transcend the system until he gets to the top where he has to fight Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Yeah.
And then he has to drop everything and then create his own new. So Bruce Lee is all about systems because he's a Sag. He's about transcending systems. And I think Aaron Rodgers has a little bit of that in him, and where he gets, I will say this about Aaron Rodgers. I think with the Neptune-Mercury conjunction, he's a little naive. Like there is a bit of naivete with him. But if he winds up getting jaundiced or he gets too much of a dose of truth, everything will come. So here's how I see his chart working.
Okay.
Right? Everything starts with Neptune in his chart, right? It goes from here to here. Neptune is at the top of the chart. Mars is at the bottom. He has no planets anywhere else. He has what's called a bundle chart. And it's all bundled between Libra and basically Sagittarius, right? Those are three signs: Libra, Scorpio, Sag. People with bundle charts have really specific purposes. Like outside of their bundle, they're nothing. This is where they exist, right? But in the bundle, everything starts with Neptune, so he has to be open, right? He has to be open to something that's transcendent. And Neptune rules drugs, right? It rules drugs. And in Sagittarius, what did he do? He went to South America, which is a very Sagittarian thing, right? I'm not going to go to somebody's house, somewhere outside of Madison, Wisconsin. I bet you can find an urban shaman in Madison, Wisconsin. No, he goes to South America, which is very Sagittarius. But everything starts here with Neptune. He's open. Let me try this. And then ultimately it winnows its way through every single sign. And then it has to be resolved through Mars, right? So this is how his chart works. Everything starts here and it has to be resolved in Mars. And what is Mars? Mars is the warrior. It's the athlete. And in Libra, there's balance. Mars in Libra is a precarious balance. And Aaron Rodgers he can be kind of prickly at times. We know that for a fact, right? So this is how his chart works. It starts here with Neptune, going to be open to all these influences. But at the end of the day, it has to balance out, and it has to essentially allow him to ply his craft or his trade, which is Mars, which is the athlete, which is the warrior. And there's a lot of stops along the way. So what's interesting about bundle people is that they can be very concentrated in their focus, and not a lot really exists outside of their focus. Another bundle chart that I talk about is Katy Perry. And
okay.
Katy Perry has a bundle chart, but it's all on the other side over here. It's like 12th house, first house, second house. That's it. That's all she's got. Right?
Yeah.
Outside of performing, her identity, her handlers in the 12th house, and her money, Katy Perry's nobody. She's nobody, right? And so for Aaron Rodgers, outside of this, quest for the transcendent and it sort of resolving itself in Libra and balance in the warrior, he doesn't really exist. Like he's on the outs with his family. He doesn't communicate with his family. They're all Christians, by the way. He's got these weird relationships with these women who seem like they're beards half the time. Right. I can't figure out his relationship with women.
Well, do you know his current relationship? Because I do.
Who's that?
So he's dating a young woman whose father is a billionaire and part owner of the Bucks. And she's a pretty young thing. You know what I'm saying? I forget her name. I think it's something, I want to say Adams or something, but pretty young thing. Okay. Basically a billionaire heiress, but she's, definitely left leaning as far as politics go, or at least what she says publicly. But yeah, it's interesting because it's for him, it's kind of a power move because this chick she comes from a lot of cash. So, and he's kind of known to do that. He's kind of known to like date for strategic reasons. Is that a Sagittarius trait? Because
Well,
if you look at his relationship,
he's got Venus and Mars and Libra, right?
okay,
They're not conjunct, but he
yeah,
has Venus. So he's trying to figure out the masculine side and the feminine side, right?
okay,
Like, I don't know, there were rumors of him in Milwaukee where he and Ryan Braun were lovers, right? You know
oh
that,
my
right?
god, Aaron,
You
come
know that.
on, man,
You
what
know
the
that,
heck?
right? Like these women felt like they were beards for
Okay,
him. And even this one what was it, Shalane or whatever, the actress, like
yeah,
she was set up with Aaron Rodgers. That's an interesting story by an astrologer. So
yeah.
Aaron Rodgers is probably into astrology because they connected through this woman who's an astrologer.
Well, he
It was
has an astrological tattoo.
yeah.
So he's definitely into astrology, and he's currently dating a woman named Mallory Edens. Total babe, if we're being real. So yeah, I wonder how strategic that relationship really is, and I wonder how authentic it really is.
Yeah, and
Um,
that whole thing with, I mean, with Manica Patrick, I mean, like, what was up with
Danica
that?
Patrick, dude. Oh, I thought, dude, I didn't think Danica was that bad looking. Do you think she's a dude?
I don't know, man.
Okay.
I
But
don't, I
yeah,
don't, I
that was
don't
a
know.
weird thing. The woman race car driver. Woo. And it was just
I
like,
always felt like she was. I think she's an Aries too. I always felt like she
okay.
was. I felt like she was a plant, right? We need
There's
a
a lot
woman
going
race
on
car.
with Danica, I think.
What's that?
It's kind of like it's entirely possible she never actually drove any of those vehicles in my view. I think it's entirely possible it was somebody else and she was just posing for pictures and playing this role. You know what I'm saying? So,
I think. Well, I think there were. I think there were images of her jumping out of her car trying to get angry with people.
oh wow, she's one of
Um,
those chicks.
5'2". What's her sign? I think she's an Aries. Let me just see here.
Yeah.
I remember looking her up.
Danica's kind of cute.
40 March 25th. She's an Aries.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. So she was like one of these hotheads on the track. I mean, I don't
Mhm.
know. I never really his
Have you
relationship
ever
is
have you ever watched NASCAR?
I watched it when I was a kid,
Uh-huh.
and then I just don't find people going around in circles very interesting.
Me neither. I could never get into it. There was one weekend where I watched it for like 2 hours, and I was like, "Whoa, I can kind of see why people get into this, but I just can't. I don't understand the appeal." Yeah, she's definitely female. Yeah,
Still
Danica's
says
cute.
she's a female. So
Yeah.
if she's a female, I still think she was a beard.
Okay.
Yeah. Well,
So
who knows? I mean, maybe Aaron goes both ways with
I don't
that
know. I
Venus.
don't think Aaron is. I think Aaron is just so obsessed with Aaron that maybe some of these women they just feel like they're not the pretty bitch when they're dating him, and then they don't like that. You know what I'm saying? Maybe he's just doing his hair, he's blow drying his hair, he's combing it, he's trying on
Well, okay,
outfits, he's
okay.
talking
So
about Aaron. You know what I mean?
the dirty little secret is that
Okay.
Joe Rogan, Aubrey Marcus, and Alex Jones, they're all into trannies. They
Oh
all
my
like
god.
trannies.
I can see anything is possible with
I mean,
Mr. Joe
Blair
Rogan.
White is like their fetish, right?
Dude, well, they're a bunch of fucking wackos. Like Aubrey Marcus, this dude is Captain Cringe of the internet. If you listen to him speak, it's so unimpressive and just disgusting because he's one of these dudes who will, sprinkle in a bunch of F bombs and he thinks it's like this bold thing. And it's just like, dude, and he'll say some just trash and you can tell that he thinks it's super deep. And it's just, that guy is just an op. He's an ops. I really enjoyed the work you did with that woman, Danny Katz. covering him. I thought that was excellent.
Well, it was me, Danny, and then also me and Emily got into Aubrey Marcus. And the weird thing about Aubrey Marcus is how much of his past has been scrubbed from the internet. Like, it's really hard to find anything sort of tactile around Aubrey Marcus. Like, there's basic details. And that's about it. You know, he was on the practice squad, or he tried out for the Philadelphia Eagles as a tight end, right? You know,
Huh.
so
I didn't know that.
so he played football in college.
Huh.
And then he tried out for the Eagles, and then I think he got hurt, and then he went the MMA route, right? He started to do MMA, and that's I think where he connected with Rogan, Eddie Bravo, and all those dudes. But they're all into weird shit, right? Like Roger Stone and all those guys. They're all into HGH. They're all into testosterone. They have this one guy who's like their chemical guru. I think they even call him like the guru. I forget his name, but like he's their guy, right? And so they're all into like super performance enhancement shit and working out, and sort of they also have this weird tranny thing going on, which is, you know, very strange. And then I know this is kind of like, you know, not really connected to them, but you ever read The World According to Garp? You ever read that?
No, I haven't.
Well, it's a great book, World According to Garp, and they made a movie out of it. And Garp is played by Robin Williams. And one of his friends in the book is a former tight end from the Philadelphia Eagles who is trans. This book was written years ago. Years ago. And John Lithgow plays that character in the movie. So he was a tight end for the Eagles. It's just kind of weird that Aubrey Marcus, I'm not saying he's trans, right?
Yeah.
But Aubrey Marcus actually tried out for the Philadelphia Eagles, and that was the position he played, which was tight end.
In my view, he's a tool to sort of mess up the population. He pushes a lot of these, exotic drugs, and he pushes polyamory. That's his big thing. And he tries to present it as like intellectual, but I don't think he can hack that, because this guy, he's dumb, in my opinion. But
well, he had a run as a stand-up comedian too, right? I think he comes from money.
Definitely.
And now that I think about it, a friend of mine, the guy who did my astrological course, who helped who shot it and edited it, I think he worked for On It for a little bit in Austin. Now that I remember it, he was working for On It, so I think he was connected to the whole Aubrey Marcus thing. But yeah, I get a sense with Aaron Rodgers that the minute he feels like he's part of a movement, he's gone.
Okay.
That's my sense with him. If they wanted somebody else if they wanted somebody to sell entheogens in that way, I'm not sure who would be the spokesperson. I'm just off the top of my head. I'm just banging around in my brain. I really don't have anybody. But I did tell you that Jake Plummer, that's what he's into, right?
Yeah.
Jake Plummer, who played for the Arizona Cardinals and the Denver Broncos. I'm going to try to get him on the show one of these nights, because my friend is his neighbor in Boulder. And that's why he came back to Colorado, because they're making entheogens. Now, if you want a guy that is specifically there to sell and move that needle, it's Jake Plummer.
Okay.
That is the dude.
Okay.
And this is somebody who's gone through trauma with sports injuries and trauma with losing his buddy, Pat Tillman, right?
Yep.
That's the other side of Jake Plummer. So I'm going to try to get Jake. I think in order to do that, I probably have to have my friend on first, who'd be a reasonable guest, because he's into sports medicine and he knows a fair bit about astrology. And he claims, and I'll take his word for it. He claims to have. There was a guy by the name of Eric Green who played tight end at Liberty University, and Eric Green was a really amazing football player, and he's on the record with saying that he helped Eric Green basically get back into the game and stay in the NFL. So Glenn would actually be a really good resource to have on one night, just as a guest, and talk about some of this stuff. And he could really bring in the sports medicine side of things. But it'd be great if we could get Jake Plummer on. I think that's the guy.
Yeah. Okay.
That is the guy, because he's in, and he's got kind of the cred. Although I think he shaved. I think the Mountain Man looked at Jake Plummer. I used to like Jake Plummer. He was a really good player.
Yeah, I liked him as a player for sure. I didn't know that much about him. I liked his style, but yeah, I never heard him speak. To be honest with you,
Jake
I'm
was
looking forward to that.
he did. I think he made the Pro Bowl a couple times. And then he retired early. I think he got out of the game early. Football is a really demanding sport. Back then, I mean, it was worse then than it is now. I was watching Jason Whitlock the other night, and he had Warren Sapp and Brett Favre and Seth Joyner on. And my takeaway is Brett Favre is in trouble physically. He's
okay.
in trouble.
Wow.
Yeah, it seemed to me like he had early onset Parkinson's or MS. Brett Favre was not all there. And
wow.
I don't think he was drunk. He just looked. I'm like, wow. And I wasn't the only one who was remarking this. Where I was like, wow, there's something happened to Brett Favre. He's a Libra, by the way. And then Seth Joyner, I really liked Seth Joyner. He used to be on Speak for Yourself with Jason, and he always had some interesting things to say. He and Jason didn't always agree, but one of the things that Seth Joyner brought up was the fact that the NFL had that lawsuit against the former players, and they kicked out a lot of fucking money to these former players for the head trauma, the CTE stuff. And that facilitated these major changes in the game, right? Like the game will never be the same because the NFL had so much money that they couldn't piss it away, right? It's kind of like, okay, yeah, we paid that. Now moving forward, we can never have that kind of payout again. Like it's a one lump sum for these players because moving forward, we're making all these changes and all these protocols so that 15 years from now, these guys can't come back to us and say, hey, we want that money too. No, we changed all that. We changed the rules. We changed the etiquette. And they have. It's not the same game. It's not even close to the same.
Right. Definitely not. It's crazy when you go on YouTube and look at the highlights from the 90s. It is a completely different game.
Oh, my God. Sure. The 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. You go back. Okay, little known fact. You go back to the 50s with football. They actually had this weird rule. It was like, you could be knocked down, but if you got knocked down and you could get up again, you could run again. Did you know that?
Yeah, if you didn't get touched, right?
Yeah, if you got knocked down, right, you could get. So that meant that somebody else would have to come down and pile drive on you, so you couldn't get back up again, right? That's how much the game has changed. I mean, it was really brutal. Like Chuck Bednarik, there's this famous play where Chuck Bednarik, who played for the Eagles, basically, they called him Concrete Chuck. What do we got here? We got Bug. What kind of bug is that? Anyway, Concrete Chuck literally decapitated Frank Gifford. I mean, he decapitated the dude. Frank Gifford was lucky that he had all of his marbles after him after that. And he told everybody in the huddle, he says, I'm taking Gifford out. I'm taking him out. And that, if he had done that today, there's a good chance Chuck Bednarik doesn't play for an entire season.
Yeah,
like he's done for the year, maybe the next year. Like they're going to make an example out of him. That's how much this thing has changed. And it's probably for the better in some ways. Like a lot of these pro athletes, pro football players, they're pretty clear that they don't want their kids playing football. Right? They're like, okay, you're going to play flag until you're about 12 or 13, and then if you have pads on, then we'll go. Yeah. Because I
think youth football is rather unnecessary. I plan on having kids someday, and I think that like playing like high school, you know what I mean? I think youth football can be totally skipped. Maybe 7th, 8th grade if you're really that into it. That's kind of my outlook on it. I think that 4th, 5th grade, it's just not that necessary. It's fun, but it's just not that necessary.
What was really interesting is Warren Sapp and Seth Joyner were talking about like the Oklahoma drill. Did you ever do the Oklahoma drill?
We did all of it. Yeah.
Like why? Why do the Oklahoma? It's like it's not going to make you a better player. And I agree with that. I totally agree with that. Like, yeah, I mean, tackling, one-on-one hitting, but the Oklahoma drill, no, it's not going to make you. So they were both like, forget that. That was ridiculous. Yeah.
And like the culture of youth football is rather sick. the culture of youth sports in general, in my view, is rather sick, especially
Can
team
be.
sports.
Can
You know
be.
what I mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
can be. I coached
Right.
my son's teams for 5 years,
Yeah.
baseball. So, and then if I wasn't coaching his teams, I was helping on the travel team. This was our team, the Heat,
Okay.
and
Go Heat.
and the Heat, and so I saw youth sports, baseball, Texas style, from a front row seat.
Okay. Wow.
I know what that's like, and I loved coaching. I loved it. I thought it was, to me, it was like, that's why. I mean, it was so funny too, because I didn't want my kid playing baseball. Fathers always want their kids to do something different than what they did, right? So I was a big team sports guy, and I didn't want my kid playing team sports. It's like, I want you to do individual stuff, like do MMA, go play tennis, go play golf, right? Develop yourself. This whole team thing is kind of like, the going along with the crowd, and a lot of, and I didn't really dig jocks. I was not into jock consciousness. I wanted to play. I liked playing, but a lot of the meatheads I played with, I could have lived without. So I wanted him to, like, go do something else. And his mother said, I really think he should play baseball. And it was like somebody who hadn't been around drugs for a long time. And it's like, no, don't go, like, don't go there, because I know what's going to happen. You get him into team sports, and that's going to be my crack. Okay. That is going to be my crack. And that's exactly what happened. And so I'll bring in some astrology. Do you mind if I tell the stories? Is that okay?
No, go for it, man. Because after this, let's transition into Deion Sanders' chart. But yeah, I want to hear that.
Deion Shador.
Yeah.
All right. So so I know that I'm a good coach, right? Because I played team sports, and I learned from really good coaches. And so he started playing in this one league in California, and the guy who was the coach of the team had played baseball at Stanford, and he was a pitcher, and he was a lawyer, and he was a fucking pain in the ass, right? He was the guy that was always the smartest guy in the room, right? And so when we were playing baseball, and we'd go to practice, we would be doing these drills all the time, but they weren't anything that was game related, right? They weren't game related at all. So we're doing these drills. I'm like, I'm scratching my head. And we're going into these games, and we're kind of getting our asses kicked. So he was away for 1 week. So I kind of took over practice, right? And I started to hit these kids infield. Hey, what a great idea. Let's hit some infield. And so they started to get good at it, right? So from that point forward, we started to hit infield, and the team went up and to the right. So I knew that, that there was some sizzle there. So we moved to Texas. He gets into a different league. And there's a thing in astrology called relocation with the chart. So if you were to move from your neck of the woods, Massachusetts, and then you were to go to, say, California, your chart would be different. And then you would show up different. You would have different aspects and different houses. And one of these nights, we're going to have to do, maybe we can bring Mark back on, but we're going to have to do a show on relocation and astrocartography. Wow. Where when one player plays for one team in one part of the country, he goes to another team, and all of a sudden his career changes. And it's because of the astrology. The astrology will play a role in this. So when I relocated from California to Texas, my chart changed. So in California, I had Jupiter and Saturn in my 5th house. So I love to play with Jupiter in my 5th house, and then there was some work involved with Jupiter in the 5th. Sort of balance each other out, right? I moved to Texas, Jupiter moves out of my 5th into my 4th, and I just have Saturn in my 5th house. So I come to Texas, and Saturn in the 5th house is a drag, right? Saturn's a drag, like it's, rules. 5th house is fun, leisure, play, romance, and I have Saturn in the 5th house in Texas. Like, not a lot of fun. It took me a couple of years to figure out that I'm not supposed to be doing the same thing in Texas as I am in California. So what happens? I take over coaching, because I saw these coaches. I'm like, you guys are not fucking doing very well. I'm sorry. Like, I could do better than you. I know I could do better than you. So I started to coach. And that was Saturn in my 5th house. 5th house is children, athletics, fun, pastimes. I became the Saturnian presence. First team I had, it was fantastic. It was 8 and 9-year-olds. At that point, I'm just going to be like super positive to these kids. And I turned these kids into, I learned so many things about kids and the human condition just by coaching that 1 year. Like, it was great. It's like, I can do this. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
So by the time I was done, he was 13 and we were competitive. All my teams were competitive. But the final year that I coached him, we won the championship. And it was because I figured out like how to do things. I figured out how to be Saturn. And I took lessons from like other, I would like Jimmy Johnson and Chip Kelly. Like I would take little bits and pieces from what they would do. And so when I would have my practices, the kids were never bored. We never just did one thing. And it always drove me crazy when these coaches would do the same thing over and over again in practice. So I would have all these stations and kids would rotate between all these stations. And I'd get dads involved. I'd have families involved. It was great. It was totally great. And I was paid like this. The biggest compliment of my coaching life was there was this guy who played for the San Antonio Spurs, and his name was James Silas. Okay. Played with him in the ABA. You may have known him. Anyway, his son also played, and I think James Silas Jr. coached the Rockets last season, and he got fired. But he was a big youth coach, pro coach, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the kids on my team, this kid was amazing. It was a great story. His name was Kai. And this kid, he was such a fucking athlete. Like he had never played baseball before. And I watched him. I'm like, I'm taking this kid because I can mold this kid, right? And I remember one day I'm throwing in batting practice and this kid is knocking the shit out of it. And I used to call him Bo, right? Because he was like freaking Bo Jackson. Right. Then I came up with his nickname, called him Kaibo, right? Kaibo. And then I asked him when his birthday was. Same birthday as Bo Jackson, swear to God.
Well,
swear to God, this kid was amazing. And his father came up to me. We were up in a batting cage one night, and we had the team there, and it was like, we had this like little offsite thing. His father came up to me. He said, I've been around a lot of coaches. And he said, you're one of the best coaches I've ever seen. Right. Nice. And so he was the guy that had hung out with James Silas all of his life. Right. So that was a huge compliment. And then we won the championship, and then that was it. I was done. But I loved it. I loved coaching the kids. I loved connecting with the parents and, figuring out how to motivate them. To me, it was one of the great gifts of my life. And there's a good side to youth sports.
It's honestly the best. Like, it's like the best. Parents get a little sick when they get a little crazy, but honestly, it is the best. And I think that in terms of what sports children play, you just got to see what, I'm not speaking from experience at all, but from what I've seen with myself and, my siblings and my cousins, you just got to see what they gravitate towards, because they're going to gravitate towards something. Whether it's baseball or soccer. Some kids don't like soccer. They don't gravitate towards it. Other kids gravitate towards baseball or basketball. So it's like, parents might have a preset idea of what they want their kids to get into, but they're going to gravitate towards one of those sports, in particular, or maybe one or two, you know what I mean? So, and I find that process interesting because you never know what they're going to gravitate towards. You know what I mean?
Yeah. For me, it's always interesting in astrology. You have these Saturn oppositions, and they happen in very specific years, 14, 44, and 74, right? So at 14, what happens with a kid is they separate out from their family, right? They separate out from their cultural influences, and they separate out from their father. So by the time my son was experiencing his Saturn opposition, he was kind of done with me. He was like, I'm done. I don't want to play. I'm tired of baseball, right? And it's like, okay, that's fine. You go do something else. Do what you do. Yeah. Which is, it's his life. And
yeah. So speaking of father and son, though, let's get into Deion and Shedeur Sanders. This guy, Deion, has helped so many people understand the sign of Leo. You know what I'm saying? Oh, like, this guy is such a prototypical Leo. It's insane. And speaking of which, on Saturday on Astro Chads, we have Leo coming out. So it's a perfect time for us to be talking about this, because this is the hottest sports story in the country, not just in college football. It's the Colorado Buffaloes, led by Deion Sanders and his son, who is a Heisman Trophy candidate, Shedeur Sanders, two-way star Travis Hunter, and a whole cast of characters. We got 50 transfers who came over from all over the country, from Alabama, from Florida State, from Houston to Kentucky, all of it. And they're now playing on the Colorado Buffaloes, who are 2-0. Huge win over Nebraska. I bet that game and won successfully. And to be honest with you guys, ever since, months and months and months ago, I start placing little bets on the Colorado Buffaloes. If they make it to the Pac-12 championship, I'll be very happy. If they win it, I'll be super happy. If not, oh well, who cares? It was a fun season, but we gotta check. So this is Deion's chart, right?
Well, not really. We don't have a birth time for him.
Okay.
So we'd have to rectify that. I've been playing around to try to figure out what his rising sign would be.
Yeah.
I tend to think that he might be a Gemini rising.
Okay.
Which would put Aquarius on his midheaven. So why don't we do this? Let me get out of here and let me go into astro.com. Let's get out of here because I'm gonna rectify Deion's chart.
Okay.
And I'll show you why I think he would be a Gemini rising.
All right.
So let me get in here and let's do this. Let's do this.
And this is often a challenge for astrologers, is finding the birth time, I assume, right?
Yeah. So there's a whole process called rectification. And when you rectify a chart, you ask very specific questions about life events. And what you want to try to do is winnow down sort of the ascendant. And I'm usually pretty good at it.
Mm-hmm.
I could probably get within, I don't know, 10 to 15 degrees of the ascendant most times. Let me see what we got here. Okay, so August 9, 1967.
So let's give people a little bit of background on Deion Sanders. So Deion Primetime Sanders is probably one of the best athletes ever, probably one of the best football players ever. If you just YouTube Deion Sanders highlights, it's outrageous. This guy starts high stepping 40, 50 yards to go, and he already knows he's going to score. So he's got a big personality. He's very, very, very much a Leo. So he also played baseball he played professional baseball as well as professional football. Okay. So he did some really, really absurd things where he would play both professional sports in the same week. Okay. It's primetime Deion Sanders. Fast forward to 2023. 2022 rather. He gets hired at the University of Colorado, where they were 1-11 prior. He gets hired from Jackson State. Jackson State is an HBCU. It's a historically black college where he recruited all these guys who would never go there. They never would have went there unless he was coaching.
Well, there was also money involved. Let's be honest. There was money.
Okay, yeah, probably. Yeah.
Travis Hunter got some money.
Oh yeah, okay. That's
he got that money. He got that money through Dave Portnoy.
I don't know how that whole story works. I don't know how Dave Portnoy funds Deion Sanders. That's such a bizarre wrinkle.
It was through either Barstool or one of the Barstool affiliates.
Yeah.
And funneled some money, and I think that's one of the reasons why they got Travis Hunter.
Okay. Well, anyways, so he's at this historically black school. They get, all these good players, whatever. He gets hired at Colorado. He really takes advantage of the transfer portal and just his own recruiting efforts, his own charisma and energy brings in his own prestige as probably one of the best football players ever, brings in all these players from all over the country transferred in. Okay. 50 new players. He's famous for a speech where he told the team that was there currently, he's like, hey, you guys better hit the transfer portal because I'm bringing some Louis Vuitton luggage with me. And a lot of you guys, I don't have use for. Fast forward to 2 weeks ago, they beat TCU. TCU was the national championship contender. They were in the national championship game. Big upset. And they beat Nebraska. Up next, they got Oregon State. And after that, it's Oregon and USC. So they got some big, big games coming up. But for now, it's a very fun and interesting story.
So let me show you what I did here. I think my sense, if I had to pick a rising sign for Deion Sanders, would be Gemini.
Okay.
And there's some reasoning behind that. Number one, it's the two sport versatility, right? Baseball and football. It also puts his son in the third house, which is Gemini's house, borderline mutual reception. If you're playing with the sun in the first house at Aries, so he has a Jupiter-Sun conjunction, right? Separated by 20 minutes. Like it doesn't get much bigger than that in terms of personality.
Okay.
Like Deion will let you know how great he is. He's a great athlete. He'll let you know. He has no problem letting you know. And he's got Mercury at 0 Leo. So here, this is the very beginning of the sign. So there's more juice at 0 degrees, right? Mercury is in its fall in Leo, right? It's exalted in Aquarius. So here it's in its fall. So Deion has a mouth. We all know Deion has a mouth. He can talk with anybody, right? So he's got Mercury in the third house, Gemini rising, makes sense. But it's this Sun Jupiter conjunction, and the absolute arrogance and the ability in who he is that sells Deion Sanders. This is it right here, right? And the third house is also ruled by Gemini, and he's a very mercurial character. From baseball to football, he moves between worlds, from an HBCU to a tidy-whitey liberal college in Boulder, Colorado. To me, that's total Gemini, right? He has no allegiance really, and so you see this with a mutable rising sign potentially, and with 3 fixed planets in the third house, which is mutable, right? Now, the other reason I think that Gemini could be his rising sign is because his son, Shador, is an Aquarius, and he's born on February 7th, which puts his son pretty close to his midheaven, right?
Wow.
And Shador is an interesting name, too. It's a Hebrew name, and it's called the bringer of light or field of light, right? And you have an opposition here with Shador and Deion. At some point, they're going to cross swords.
Yeah.
I can tell you that right now. At some point, they're going to cross. For now, they're great. And it looks like, between Shador, Travis Hunter, Caleb Williams, those are your 3 front runners for the Heisman Trophy after 2 games in college football. I think where Deion has some issues is his foot. And he's got that Chiron at 29 degrees Pisces, last degree of the zodiac, right? Chiron, the wounded healer, right? The wounded heel. And Pisces rules the feet.
Wow.
So Deion, I'm going to go on record. Here, we throw some transits in here. Just look at this. I'm going to go on record, and I'm going to predict that Deion's going to lose his foot. I think he's already lost part of it. He limps around now, right? Have you seen him? He's limping around all the time. Mm-hmm. So when Saturn conjuncts Chiron, and we have Neptune conjuncting Chiron, and Pisces rules the feet, and he's got Chiron retrograde in his chart, I think this is going to be a big moment for Deion Sanders, because he's, what's he been known for? High stepping and speed, right? This is going to be his Achilles heel. And it'll be interesting to see how he's already had 2 operations on his feet. And I think without, getting in trouble with the YouTube censors, I think we can make a case as to why he's going through this. Right?
What could it be? Who knows? I have no idea. I have no pontifications. I haven't the slightest clue.
I have a slight clue.
Okay.
And I'm going to let you fill it in. Right.
Okay.
And it has to do with the same thing that has happened to LeBron James's kid, Bronny. By the way, they said that he has myocarditis. Did you know that myocarditis is usually discovered well in advance of a heart condition? Like, think about all the times Bronny James has had to take physicals. He's got a father who's a fucking health freak, and they get the best sports doctors and the best sports medicine around. And you would have thought that somewhere along the way, with all the AAU physicals and all the other stuff, that somewhere the myocarditis would have shown up, because it would have. It would have. And now all of a sudden he's got it. Where did it come from? Gee.
I can't figure it out. I have no clue. I can't even conceive, or I just have no idea. It's a complete mystery. No idea.
So what's interesting about Coach Prime is that his true node is at 0 degrees Taurus. What is Taurus? It's the bull, right?
Right.
And the buffalo and the bull, they're a little bit different, but they're kind of related.
Yeah, they kind of are. Yeah.
So he's making his mark. And what's really interesting is he just went through his nodal return, right? So I bet if we wound the clock back and we looked at when he announced that he was going to be the coach at University of Colorado, he would have had his nodal return right there. Would have been bang on. See, this is the transiting node right here, right? So it had gone from 0 Taurus to Aries, right? So he has that true node in Aries. And Saturn in the 11th house, which is all about team, right? And this is where Saturn would show up as a coach, the authority figure of a team. So I think we can make a pretty good case here for Deion Sanders as a Gemini rising, rectifying his chart. That's my sense.
I'm going to roll with it. That makes total sense. Everything you just laid out.
And the other thing too is, like, he is a bit of a gypsy in terms of his playing career, right? He played all over the place. He started off in Atlanta.
He played Falcons, Niners, Dallas, Cowboys, right? Ravens.
Dallas, he went to, I think, the Ravens.
Yep.
Right, and after the Ravens, he went to the Redskins. So he played for 5 different football teams. Baseball-wise, he started off with the Yankees. He was drafted by George Steinbrenner. And then he went to, if I'm not mistaken, Cincinnati.
Yep.
And then after Cincinnati, the Giants. And after the Giants, he went to the Braves. So he played on 4 different baseball teams, 5 different football teams. And that's kind of a gypsy, right? He's got that Uranus-Moon conjunction. He has a lot of Virgo in his chart. A lot of Virgo. And he's got that Mars in Scorpio, which is very intense, like super intense. And this is a guy who, when I think he engages his will with the Mars-Pluto sextile from Mars to Pluto here, he can make shit happen.
Yeah.
He can make shit happen.
So we'll ask you real quick about Aquarius and Shador, because I didn't know that, right? The thing that blew my mind about Aquarius is the fact that Michael Jordan, Wayne Gretzky, Cristiano Ronaldo are all Aquarius, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, does he have the potential to be freakishly good being an Aquarius? Because he's really good. Like, he's had a great couple of games. He's been coached by Tom Brady. Tom Brady texts him after games and stuff like that. So he's got the pedigree. But do you think he has the ability to be freakishly good like some of those other Aquarius guys I mentioned?
Well, Aquarius is a really, it can be a really odd sign, right? Like, sometimes Aquarian quarterbacks can be really, really good. Other times, like Jeff George is an Aquarius. Did you ever run across Jeff George in his playing days at all?
I think he's before my time.
So Jeff George actually went to high school with Jason Whitlock.
Okay.
And I think they won the state championship in Indiana. Jason goes to Ball State. Jeff George goes to Purdue. Jeff George has arguably one of the greatest arms ever. He could throw the ball on a line 70 yards downfield and hit a tin can. That's how good Jeff George was. But he also had kind of a 10-cent head. Like, he was goofy. Like, okay. You get that with Aquarians. They're not always, look at the sign, right? They're waves. They're up, they're down, they're up, they're down. And sometimes, when they're up, depending on their up cycle, they can be really, really good. They can break the mold. What they do can be revolutionary. Like what Michael Jordan did was revolutionary. He was a revolutionary, basketball player. I think you can find some of that with Aquarian athletes. They're different. I think, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't Jim Brown an Aquarian? The football player, again, kind of revolutionized the sport, right? So he could. I mean, Shador could revolutionize pro football if he's an Aquarian. But the thing is,
I'll change that though. I think he'll revolutionize college football, because I think he's going to be one of those guys that is currently making more money than most pros. And I think he's going to stay in college for a while. And I think that's potentially where him and Coach Prime could potentially butt heads. It's like, hey, buddy, I'm not going to the pros. I'm going to stay here. That could be a potential situation where they butt heads.
I'm going to push back on that, because even if I think he's dating an actress too, isn't he? He's dating this. Yeah, no, he's dating an actress, so he's already living a very grown-up life, right?
Right.
Like he's on sort of this this accelerated path. But I think that the ultimate goal, until college sports gets to this point where you have, and you and I talked about this a little bit, where they're playing 6 seasons, and theoretically you could play 6 seasons of college football. It's not out of the question.
Right.
Russell Wilson, I think, had 2 seasons at South Carolina, and then he had 2 seasons at Wisconsin, and he had undergrad at South Carolina. So I think Russell Wilson was around for 5 years, maybe 4 of which he played. And it was when he went to Wisconsin, which is where he caught the eyes of the Seattle Seahawks. Jim Brown's an Aquarian, by the way. So Aquarians change things. Like Jim Brown changed pro football.
Right.
In a lot of different ways. Like he was the first pro football player that was like a real 20th century body. You know what I mean? Like he was fast, he was big. Like Jim Brown could play in this era if he wanted to. And then Jim Brown also had, even though he wasn't strident with his positions in terms of race, he also wasn't a wallflower either. You know, he was very clear about who he was. And he played for Paul Brown, and Paul Brown, treated his players like men. He had a pretty integrated team, actually. So yeah, I mean, this is what happens with Aquarians. They change the sports that they're in. So could Shador Sanders change college football? It probably already has.
Yeah, I think so. I think between him and Caleb Williams made a public statement recently that is quite reflective of what we've been talking about. And he basically said he's not going pro if it's not a good situation. If it's not a good situation, I'm going back to USC.
Right.
And I think Shador will be in a similar position where it's like he's only a sophomore now, so he could play 2 more years at least of college football.
Well, here's where I think it'll get interesting.
Okay.
By the way, if we're staying in the Aquarian kind of, radical rule breaker mold, Babe Ruth was an Aquarian as well.
Wow.
So you have Babe Ruth, Michael Jordan, and then you have Jim Brown, 3 athletes that changed sports that they were in.
Wow.
So that's
same
how
thing with Wayne Gretzky and Cristiano Ronaldo as well.
And Gretzky's an Aquarian too. And Gretzky changed hockey. I mean, he was one of those guys that just, did everything with such grace and ease. And Gretzky was the Montana of hockey. He had such great peripheral vision, and he had such great reflexes. He was kind of ahead of the play all the time. But I mean, I think that Shador Sanders is probably already changing college football.
Right.
Travis Hunter is a Taurus. He's born on May 15th. And of course, being a Taurus, he's also a bull, right? And he's playing for the Colorado Buffaloes. So we have this Buffalo imagery showing up in Travis Hunter, and also Deion Sanders with his true note in Taurus. And you put the 3 of them together and you have a T-square, right? So Travis Hunter is born, I think, May 15th. Shador Sanders, February 7th. And then Deion's chart. What did I have for Deion? What was his birthday again? August 9th. So he and Shador are almost opposite signs.
Wow.
And sometimes it can be good, and sometimes it can be not so good. So if these two ever have a falling out, it will be a hardcore falling out, like hardcore, like a falling out where they don't speak for a long time because they're both fixed signs. And then you have Travis Hunter in there. That's going to be really interesting as long as they keep winning. I think this triumvirate will work. If they start to lose and they have a couple of bad games in a row, it'll be interesting to see what happens to these three. Because with that T-square fixed sign, the wheels could come off. Either the wheels could come off or they could battle together, get through it, and then, we went through this hard patch. We got through it. We're kind of back on top again. So it can either go one of two ways. The wheels kind of fall off these guys if they start losing, or if they hit this hard patch, it's going to force them with these fixed signs to kind of, bolt it up and then get to the next level. But I think that Deion Sanders and his son could have a falling out at some point. And it could be with, could be any number of things. Mark and I were looking at this with Deion, and I was talking with somebody else on Twitter. I think Deion could have some issues coming up around either gambling or a sex scandal. And it's really interesting because Mel Tucker, who had coached at Colorado, by the way, Colorado has always thought of itself as being this really progressive college, right? Hey, let's hire a black guy, let's hire Carl Dorrell and stink, right? Let's hire Mel Tucker and stink. They're going to get it right eventually. So they finally got their guy, Deion Sanders. But now Mel Tucker, who's at Michigan State, he signed a huge contract, right? He beat Michigan and Jim Harbaugh, and he signed a huge deal based on that win. And now he's getting Me Too'd at Michigan State. So I don't know what sign Mel Tucker is, but it's kind of interesting, right? Like he was there at Colorado at some point before Deion was. And I feel like Deion might have a bit of the Achilles heel there, either with the gambling stuff, which you and I have talked about, or possibly some of the Me Too stuff. And I think that maybe his kid could play a role in this thing. It's going to be, not that his kid is going to gamble, because I don't think he will. But there's something, there's a precarious balance with these three in terms of their astrology. So just keep an eye on them.
Okay, I'll keep an eye on it. I'm not so sure I'm sold on that, but when it happens, if it does happen, I'll remember this conversation. Okay, so I got to ask you something. As far as Deion being sort of a gypsy, how long do you see him staying at Colorado? Do you think he's going to take a bigger job, potentially Florida State or even Alabama?
Well, I think ultimately he wants to go to Florida State. I think he wants.
Me too.
I do, but but if he has an Aquarian midheaven, he could take the job at Florida just to piss off Florida State. I could see Deion.
Wow. Okay.
But I think Deion, if you look at, even when he was with the Cowboys, he went there in 95, and I think he was gone by 99. He's usually about 4 to 5 years with a team. So I think he'll have, it depends. If his son plays another year and Travis Hunter stays another year, he could be, I think he could be 3 years at Colorado.
Okay.
And then I think he'd be gone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't see him staying there after his kids are gone. You know what I mean? I think at that point it'll be mission complete for him, and he'll move on to most likely Florida State. I could see him doing Florida, even Miami, but even somewhere like Auburn or Alabama potentially. We'll see how it goes for Mr.
Well,
Mr.
I think he'd love to get back into the state of Florida.
Yeah.
And would he like to replace Nick Saban? I think he'd probably love it.
Mm-hmm.
He'd love to replace Nick Saban.
Yeah.
So,
speaking of Nick Saban, next week we have one of Nick Saban's former players coming on the show. Mr. Christopher Gardner will be joining us as guest, and I think that should be pretty exciting because I think Alabama They already have one loss to Texas. I think they're going to lose 3 or 4 times this year, which for them and that program is catastrophic. It is kind of like 9/11 for them if they lose 3 or 4 games. So
Right.
it's going to be a time period in which Nick Saban is truly in the hot seat, and they might make some serious changes because right now their quarterback sucks. This kid, I forget his name, Jalen Milroe. He's not good. The guy who played before him, what was his name? He looks like a kid. He plays on Carolina Panthers now.
Right.
Bryce Young. Bryce
Young.
Young was a magician. He was an absolute magician at the college level. When there was no play, he would create it, and it would be a big play. So Jalen Milroe doesn't have that, and they had this other Notre Dame transfer who sucks. So Alabama's in a tough spot right now. They got some tough games coming up. They got that SEC schedule. This week they got University of South Florida. They should win. After that, they got Ole Miss. I'm sorry. That's typically an automatic win for them. Not this year. It's going to be a very tough game, and that's going to be an interesting storyline. But I'm really looking forward to having Christopher Gardner on. He's probably one of the best.
Bryce
Young was a magician. You won multiple championships.
Run.
Like how many national championships did Bryce Young win?
He would run.
He would run and he would scramble. And
Mary Lee is an SEC territory, man. She knows.
Okay, that's what I like about these people. A lot of these people are like thorough college football fans. That's to me, it's where it's at.
She says, "Rebuilding, young man, rebuilding."
Oh, she's okay. So she's a Bama fan.
Oh,
so
Mary Lee bleeds crimson. She bleeds crimson.
Okay. Somebody else says, can't believe Saban could ever be on the hot. Dude, if they lose 3 or 4 games,
that's you.
You know that the Alabama fans are going to be freaking out and they're going to be angry and they're going to be upset.
I think Saban has earned plenty of time and credit.
I think so too. I'm a Saban guy. I like Saban, but I'm saying the rumor mill is going to start churning and people are going to be very angry with 3 or 4 losses. Okay. Very angry. And I anticipate that happening, So, because you got issues at the quarterback position for sure.
So Nick Saban, from what look at this, we got Kelly here. Yes, roll top, man. We got some Bama people here.
Okay, but they probably agree with me about Jalen Milroe. It's an issue. He needs to improve, or they need to. Who's ever the third stringer, as long as it's not Milroe or the Buckner, go with him. Go with him. Whoever it is.
Apologize to the fans. Look at that.
Wow.
Bill Smith.
Wow.
Alabama is represented in this place.
Yeah. Wow.
Al, you better.
I angered the tide, man. The elephant has angered the tide. I'm sorry, I didn't know we had so many people from Tuscaloosa.
Oh.
But it's going to be a tough year. You know it. I know it. Hopefully that, it's a tough year to rebuild.
Kelly bringing the knowledge. He just signed another.
Okay, that's good knowledge. That's good. He just signed another 8. He deserves it.
You're getting kind of lapped by the ladies tonight. I'm sorry.
I didn't know they were all Alabama fans, but I'm telling the truth. They know I'm telling the truth. It's going to be a tough year. Jalen isn't a good quarterback. You guys know it. I know it. Mac Jones had a great game on Sunday. He's a Alabama guy.
I like Mac Jones.
Well, they lost, but he had a great game. He played well.
I looked at his chart and I thought Mac Jones could be a very successful pro quarterback.
Yeah, he played great on Sunday, but they lost. But whatever, Yeah.
Let's take a quick look at the game. Let's see what's happening with the game. Let's check in.
Yeah, let's see if freaking Aaron Rodgers is recovered from his injury.
So it's 13-6 Bills.
Okay. See, that's one thing I also don't like about the NFL. That's a typical score. Like, final score will be like 21-14, right? Versus college football, it's like 48 to like 31. You know what I mean? There's just more scoring. I find it to be more honest, and it's like just less controlled than the NFL,
So we've got Zach Wilson, 11 of 18 for 99 yards.
That's not cutting it, Zach.
Josh Allen is not having a great night. 25 of 32, 190 yards, 1 TD, and 3 INTs.
Yikes.
3. Yeah. So there you go. There's your update. And they're still ahead, 13-6. So we'll see what happens here. All right, let's talk a little international FIBA basketball.
Yeah, let's do it.
And Steve Kerr. So Steve Kerr just finished a season with the Golden State Warriors that was a 5-alarm fire. Absolute 5-alarm fire. And it started off with Draymond Green punching my guy Jordan Poole. I really like Jordan Poole. Jordan Poole is electric, and he's fun to watch. He's got charisma to burn, and he got into a situation where he's a Gemini too, right? Geminis, they will talk smack. They'll talk smack. Geminis just do that. They will get under your skin. And that's what Jordan Poole was doing. And I guess he got under Draymond Green's skin.
Mm-hmm.
I guess Draymond was having a bad day. And so he got into Jordan Poole's face and then kind of nudged him with his elbow. He baited him, right? He baited him. He did a whole show on this. And astrologically, they got Gemini Pisces, and their signs are in square with each other, right? Squares create disharmony. They create tension, right? Gemini Pisces. And you can even see it when they lined up. Draymond Green starts on one sideline. Jordan Poole's on the baseline. They're at a fucking 90-degree angle with each other, right? That is astrology in action. I did a whole show on this. Moved it back and forth, right? And then eventually crosses the line, starts John and Jordan, puts his shoulder into Jordan, baits him. Jordan pushes him away, and then Draymond goes full on Superman into his face, right?
Yeah, I saw the tape, yeah.
This starts the whole season. And it was a disaster. They never recovered from this whole thing because Draymond Green is a borderline sociopath. That's all their story. But Steve Kerr, who has been a proponent of what they call small ball, did not have the requisite large bodies that you need to ultimately compete. They traded James Wiseman, big guy, 7'1", never really found a suitable replacement. They kept Jonathan Kuminga, who's 6'7", on the bench against the Lakers. They got run out by the Lakers, who had AD. They had LeBron, Rui Hachimura, Jared Vanderbilt. They were just bigger, right? They were just bigger than the Warriors. So Steve Kerr decides that he's going to pick the team for the FIBA team, like the international team. What does he do? He says, I wanted a balance between players that could play offense and defense. Steve Kerr is a Libra, right? So he wants this balance between his players. What he didn't have is he didn't have any big guys, right? He had Paolo Banchero, who didn't really play, Jaren Jackson, who always fouls out, Walker Kessler, who didn't really play, and that was it. He had at one point, they were playing Jalen Brunson at the 1. Jalen Brunson, who is 6'1", was playing center. And you wonder why they finished 4th, right? It's because Steve Kerr got this Libra thing in his brain that we have to have this balance. We have to have players that balance each other out. Often, what you need is a fucking big man. Because these other guys were a lot bigger. One of your guys from the Celtics, Daniel Theis, you know that guy, Daniel T. He was on the team, the Theis.
Okay. He's an Eastern European type dude.
Yeah, it was like, I think it was a German team. I think they beat him. Because they had bigger players. I mean, that guy he's a good NBA player, but he's not a great NBA player.
Right.
So this is why the FIBA now all of a sudden, LeBron is going to be in Paris in the Olympics, and Steph is going to be there, and AD is going to be there. Now they're going to show up. They're going to have the dream team. I fucking hated the dream team, by the way. I'm just going on.
Did you really? Why is that? How can you hate the dream team?
Because I grew up in a period of time when college basketball was actually really good. The dream team that I thought this was the best college basketball team was the '84 Olympic team with Michael Jordan.
Huh.
That team was great, coached by Bob Knight. Chris Mullen was on that team. That team was fantastic.
Yeah.
Alvin Robertson. They went in, they cleaned everybody's clock. They were really good, really, really good. And then '88 rolls around. You have John Thompson coming in. Terrible, terrible. It was in Korea. Terrible. He picked the wrong guys, coached the wrong style of basketball, and they lost. And it was after that, it was like, okay, we can't lose again. Now we're going to get the pros. And it was like overkill. The teams that they played against in Spain in '92, they were all mediocre. They could have gone with the best college team and wiped those guys out. There wasn't any really good team during that Olympics. So it's like, whatever. I'm not a fan of like, this is just me again speaking. I'm not a fan of professionals in the Olympics, but that ship has long sailed.
Okay, so I have basically the complete opposite perspective as you.
Yeah.
I think that the USA basketball team should be like the Monstars in Space Jam. I think that the USA basketball team should have the best United States athletes. And I think that my personal favorite team was the 2012 United States Olympic team. Let's check out this roster. We got Kevin Durant, Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, Carmelo Anthony, Kevin Love, Tyson Chandler, Russell Westbrook. That to me, and then off the bench, we got like Blake Griffin, Anthony Davis, whatever. They're like their subs, their reserves. That to me is a USA basketball team. Okay. The dream team, love it. That is the gold standard. And I absolutely despise to the point where I don't even acknowledge at all. Didn't watch a single game. This current, team that's like the C, this is like the D team. Okay. This is like the G team.
Well, that's because Steve Kerr picked the team. And
right.
Again, it's a byproduct of this whole balance thing. We have to have balance. And when you play Jalen Brunson at center, are you kidding me?
It's absurd. The whole thing is absurd. It's just like, that's not a USA basketball team. And I'm totally amped. You're talking about Paris. Is that where the Olympics are or something? You mentioned Paris.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm for it. If the USA is competing
they have
in a
to.
global tournament,
right?
dude, they need to win every game by 25 plus. Any game that's not won by 25 plus is a failure.
Once these foreign teams were fielding players who played in pro leagues in Europe, they had to let the American pros in. That was a foregone conclusion.
Yeah.
Right. So when you had who was the big guy that what's his name? Oscar. He played for Brazil. He was one of Europe's best players. But you had these European teams and the South American teams. Those guys were playing pro basketball on the side. And even the Russian teams were state sponsored and they could train all year round. They had to change the rules, right? They had to. And that's when this version of NIL started to hit the Olympics and players could get big money for sponsorships and stuff like that. So, as it is now, that's fine. Go with the big guns and go kick ass, whatever.
Yeah.
But you and I grew up in a different time, and there was an interesting purity around the NBA. I'm not the NBA, the college players going up against these guys in many of these countries that were men, right? And it was cool because when you had a team that was young and could take on these men playing in these other countries, it was badass. It was totally badass. Like our youth beat your men. That's how good we are, right? And that's why I liked it. And I used to enjoy the Olympics. I don't really watch them anymore. I haven't watched the Olympics in years. They don't mean anything to me. Now it's just some sort of globalist worldwide conglomerate circle jerk. I could care less about it.
Right. And it's a lot of the Olympics is a lot of like boarding school sports. If you really look at it, it's a lot of like water polo and these archery things. It's a kind of it's not as global as it's made out to be. It's more globalist, as you said. But I'd say this: if you're going to do a USA basketball team, do a USA basketball team, and do it for real. And let's win the gold medal. Anything less than the gold medal is an absolute catastrophic event. So
I wonder. I wonder how much the trans athlete is going to make inroads into the next Olympics in Paris.
it probably will, and it's going to be painful to watch, think about, or even see. And I think you're right. I think it will play a role because, dude, I was watching, college football, and they got this one ad where it's a transsexual, and I saw that ad like 8 times, and it's just normalizing it for the populace, and it's just so bizarre and just rather unacceptable. It's just bizarre.
Tom brought this up. The Miracle on Ice was great. One of the greatest moments in sports. Miracle on Ice with the 1980 men's Olympic hockey team. Wow. And they beat the Russians in the was it the semifinal game? And then I think who did they beat in the finals? Was it the Finns or something like that? Herb Brooks, just an amazing story with that. And that was a time when that was before you were born, and America was reeling, man. We were in a very hard place. We were coming out. Carter was president, and he fucking sucked, right? And we were just coming out of, this really, really dark time politically, economically, and this hockey team was the story, man. They for a moment in time, it was like the American spirit and the American psyche were no longer under the spell of demoralization. It was great. Susie, the 84 Olympics in LA were awesome. They were great. They were totally great. I think they had a UFO at the 84 Olympics, by the way.
Huh.
And I think they might have staged it, but it was there. It was like, that was a big deal. It's like, oh, do you guys see that UFO? Was that real? Was that not real? Was that part of the opening ceremonies? But that 84 Olympic team was fucking badass. They were so good. So it's 13-13. And I guess Breeze Hall, who got, I guess he got a touchdown here. Is that right? He's got 9 carries. Okay. He's got 9 carries for 124 yards.
Okay.
So he's lighting it up. Let me see the box.
So you prefer the NFL over college football, correct?
I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, there was a period where I was actually enjoying college football. Like, I liked the fact that the games were reffed better. Like, they didn't have a lot of ticky-tack calls.
Right.
And I live here in the Southwest, so I could watch like Texas Tech and Baylor and SMU and all these Texas schools and enjoy their football, TCU. I like that stuff. But now, the whole transfer portal and the NIL and sort of the balkanization of these leagues leaves me less into it, less inspired, honestly. And that doesn't mean that I feel all that great about the NFL either. I think I'm going to start following the Canadian League.
Just be different. Or maybe the XFL. The XFL is hard, man. And I'll tell you what, the XFL, all those guys played at D1 schools. They're real players. It's not a scrub league.
They're really good.
Yeah.
What's his name? That Ben DiNuzio guy. I mean, he's like, the star quarterback of that league, and he was a D1 college player.
Yep. No, I think like they all are for the most part. There might be
I think some of them are probably D2 guys, but yeah, a lot of those guys played big time college ball. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I grew up during a period where they had the USFL, and that shit was fun. That was really fun. The USFL, especially the first 2 years. By the time Donald Trump really got his hooks into the league, it was on its way. But those first 2 years of the USFL, it was electric.
Yeah, that's like a forgotten period of history. Like the NFL like doesn't mention that, they don't like to. The fact that, the USFL And there was the
Yeah,
merger. What's the brief synopsis on that? Because I know it sort of, but not that well.
Well, they didn't really have a merger. Trump tried to get a merger, and he
Yeah.
actually sued the NFL for antitrust, and he won.
Wow.
But the court, the jury awarded him $1.50,
Huh.
and he still has the check. And there's a great 30 for 30 on ESPN called Small Potatoes about the USFL. And Trump plays a role in it. And it gives you kind of an insight into Trump, and not in a very good way. Like, you could tell that Trump is really into corporations, because he just thought, yeah, XFL or USFL, small potatoes. And he was kind of in a feud with the owner of the Memphis. Was it the Memphis team? I always get confused because the Memphis team became the Jacksonville team. His name was John Bassett, and John Bassett was a Canadian. And originally, he had a World Football League team called the Memphis Northmen, I think. And then the World Football League, I think, lasted maybe 2 seasons at the most. You don't even know about the World Football League, do you?
I don't. I never heard of that.
Okay, so the World Football League started when I was, I think, around 14. And they had like the Southern California Sun, and they had all these teams like Southern California Sun, the Jacksonville Sharks, the Detroit Wheels, the Philadelphia Bell, I think, the Philadelphia Bell, Liberty Bell. And it was a really weird kind of hodgepodge league. It didn't last very long, but they had some very interesting players. And there was like Paul Warfield and Jim Kick and Mercury Morris. Paul Warfield, Jim Kick, and Larry Zonka, they all left. They all left the Dolphins because they were offered like $1 million a season to play in the World Football League.
Wow.
And then when they came back, they sort of scattered to the winds. I think Zonka played for the Giants. I think it lasted about 2 years. The whole idea was to draft regional players. I remember Pat Hayden, James McAllister. They all played for Kermit Johnson. Those guys were all, kind of stars down in Southern California. They played for the Southern California Sun. Didn't last very long.
Mm-hmm.
Then the USFL came along in the 80s. It was pretty fun. They had some really good players in the USFL. They had some guys going from the NFL to the USFL, but they were raiding the college ranks, and they had like Reggie White and Herschel Walker, all those guys.
Wow.
Like Marcus Dupree, Doug Flutie. They had a ton of talent in the USFL.
Yeah.
Kelvin Bryant. And then eventually the league collapsed, and I don't think they had a draft. I think NFL teams probably had draft rights to certain players that they had drafted, so they could then go back and kind of sign these guys. But it was fun. The USFL was a lot of Jim Kelly played in the USFL. I played down here in San Antonio, and it was fun. It was a lot of fun. And then, of course, you had the AFL. And the AFL, there's a great series called Football in Color, I think. And I think it was a Showtime 4-part series. And you can actually watch it on YouTube, Full Color Football. And it goes through the history of the AFL, which is really tremendous. And I was really young when the AFL was around. And I remember the first time I saw an AFL game, it was at my cousin's house in Oceanside, and they had an AFL game on TV, and I just remember it being really exciting. And I remember the announcers being really excited, and I was like, wow, this is different. It's interesting. And they actually managed to make a merger with the NFL. And so that was a real, kind of cultural watershed. And that all happened 1969, 1970. 69 is when the AFL finally wins. And of course, that game between the Jets and the Colts, a lot of people, this gets back to your gambling bit, and there are guys who played for the Colts that said that game was thrown. Like, they needed the Jets to win that game so that they could establish a beachhead for the AFL. And I wouldn't be surprised if that game was thrown.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot to say. I just want to ask you real quick. You've seen the documentary Hoop Dreams, right?
Yeah.
Because I've heard incredible things about it.
Yeah. No, it's a good documentary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of about gambling and like they follow these guys for like 10 years and they're basketball players and stuff like that.
Yeah. So it's these two young guys, Arthur, what's his name? I always forget his name. And it's set in Chicago. And Arthur Agee and William Gates. And these two young guys, Peter, I think, directed by Steve James, produced by Frederick Marks, James and Peter Gilbert. And it's a very interesting movie because Arthur Agee and what's his name? Williams are William Gates. They're two very different personalities and two very different players. Like Arthur Agee is totally street. Like he's total street ball. He's playing in Chicago, goes to an inner city school. And William Gates is very different. He winds up going to one of these private school academies. Of the two, he was probably the better player. And then he gets a knee injury and kind of fucks everything up. And I guess there's a follow-up to that from 2007 called Hoop Reality. But it's worth watching. It's part of the Criterion Collection. It's one of these great sports documentaries. It shows sort of behind the curtain two very different lives. One kid goes the private academy route. The other kid goes the inner city route. So, yeah, good movie.
Yeah. Well, that's excellent. I guess we're almost towards the end here. We got about, 4 minutes left to show. I sent Robert my book. Al Dawg is a published author, and my book, The Charter, A Millennial Journey Out of Hip Hop Hypnosis, in my opinion, is a true classic. We'll get Robert's opinion shortly. I'm serious. Like, dude, so many people have hit me up saying that they involuntarily laughed out loud. Like, I had this one guy help me edit it. He's an English teacher down in Texas. Or no, he's down in Florida. He had to leave the room because he was working on it when his class was there, and he had to leave the room because he was laughing so hard. So it's really about a group of kids, millennials rather. They become adults and they grow up as hip hop fans, and sort of how the music affects their different lives. There's these cops, there's record executives, there's these rappers trying to kill each other. All these plots intertwined in this one novel written by the Al Diggity Dog on Friday Publishing.
I'm going to read it. And
you're going to fucking love it, dude. You're going to absolutely love it. Like, you're going to laugh, man. And it reminds me of something that you and Christopher Gardner talked about. And you had a really funny line about the rappers nowadays. What is it? Little Zane or little, whatever the fuck it is, little, or, you had a funny line about modern rap music, and it's very, very true. And for me and men of my age, a lot of us are snapping out of it, snapping out of hip hop hypnosis. And it's kind of like ridiculous to think that we ever thought that genre was cool, because as it's advanced, it's only become more over the top, just violent and whack and just gay.
No, I think it's become one of the greatest and most dangerous tools of social programming.
You nailed it. You nailed it. And the way to get out of it is through humor with a relatable fictional narrative. So The Charter is the solution, as I say. It's the soil to grow something new.
Well, listen, you just got a sale there. Look at that.
Oh, Mary my God. Lee. Let's go. Yeah, it's on Amazon, Mary Lee. Appreciate that. It's on Amazon. Just type in The Charter by Al Dawg, and I think you're going to love it as well.
All right, so real quick before we go, looks like it's 16-13 Jets. They're up at 1 minute and 48. Buffalo's got the ball. All right, so who were you into in the hip hop world? What was your style?
Growing up for me, it was the biggest one growing up was Eminem, because he came out with the Marshall Mathers LP when I was 10 years old, and my father was a huge fan. Then later it was the 50 Cent G Unit. After that, it got into the Lil Waynes. I was a huge Lil Wayne fan for a while. I was even a Wiz Khalifa fan. And then it just got progressively more ridiculous. until 2014, I was unironically a Young Thug fan. And Young Thug is currently in jail for a very, very long time. He's facing a RICO conspiracy charge. Jeffrey Lamar Williams had a lot of people killed. Well, at least almost a handful of people killed in his rise to superstardom. So for a while, I was just completely obsessed with like hip hop conspiracies because these guys die all the time, and there's usually a lot going on with these deaths. So for a while, I was working on a book on all the hip hop conspiracies and deaths, and then I was like, over the course of my research, I was like, this is so ridiculous. I stopped being a fan. And I couldn't even listen to it anymore because I got so deep into the research and I realized all these guys are scumbags. All these guys are trash. You know what I mean? And I was just like, I can't do this anymore.
Young men and young communities.
What's that?
Right. It's destroying young men, young women, and communities.
Yes. Absolutely. Hip hop is the most pervasive poison in our society. And it's probably the greatest psychological operation ever. And I think the way to get out is through humor and just sort of laugh at it. And it's, it's really, really insane once you snap out of it, because I'm not the only huge fan of my generation. Most of my generation and the kids younger than me, the guys younger than me, the young men and women, it's all they listen to. And it's insane. So yeah. I
interviewed Cool Keith one time.
Okay. Who is he?
Oh, Cool Keith, Dr. Octagon. You know Cool Keith?
Was he part of, I don't know. Was he part of
Onyx? He's from Brooklyn.
Okay.
He got a major deal with Sprite. Cool Keith was great. He was very interesting. I was kind of hip hop, right?
Yeah.
Like, did you ever listen to DJ Spooky at all? Did you ever listen to that guy?
Nope.
Saul Williams. You ever get into Saul Williams spoken word? I was into the whole kind of West Coast, like, Del the Funky Homo Sapien backpacker stuff, like, because that was around me. Right, all that style, that sound was around me, and some of that I thought was actually really interesting. Like, here's a guy from your neck of the woods. You might even know of him. Do you know Mike Ladd? You know Mike Ladd? Went to Boston College, I think.
No, I don't think I do.
Oh, okay, so I got a recommendation. Okay, Mike Ladd.
Okay.
Was it 2,000 miles from the after future? This is a great record.
Okay. Because you were in the record business.
I highly recommend this. I was in the music world.
Yeah.
And let's see. Welcome to the After Future. That's what it's called.
Okay.
That record. Let me just make sure I got the right. Welcome to the After Future in year 2000, 5,000 miles west of the future. This shit is brilliant, man. Really, really good stuff. Mike Ladd is on there. LP is on there. Mr. Len. Big Just, Company Flow. Anyway, that was my kind of hip hop. And I'm an old white dude, but I used to listen to that stuff.
Yeah.
All right. Real quick here. Susie said, wasn't this a Tavistock construct as well to break the African American family? I would say yes. Yeah. I would say that most music is programming. Period. End story.
And tuning.
Yeah. All right, real quick, let's take a quick look at the game, Al.
Okay.
We got 16-13, 29 seconds left. Buffalo is got its third timeout. What is the game cast here? Let's see. Looks like they're going to pull out a win unless Buffalo is in field goal range. I think they're on the 42. They're on the Jets 42. 2nd and 5. How many timeouts do they have? They're out of timeouts. So they could kick a field goal and push this thing into overtime, which on Monday night, this is what ESPN wants. Okay, there we go. The ball just moved forward. Josh left to Diggs, York 31, and they've got how much time is left? I hardly took any time at all. Okay. So you want to say to the end of the game, or do you want to end the show?
No, let's end the show because I don't think we serve well as commentators on a live game, or maybe we could, but I think we should end it and just we'll see people next Monday. Big show with our friend Christopher Gardner, and I'm looking forward to that as I am every Monday. at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for everybody on the East Coast. And Robert, do you have any goodbyes for the audience or anything of that nature?
No, I'm just I'm looking forward to getting your book so I can.
Yeah, you're gonna love it, man. And Chris, I sent a copy to Christopher Gardner as well. So
hip hop rabbit hole. All right, let's
Yeah.
play the game and get out of here. Al, thanks for being here. Everybody else, take good care and stay serious. Here we go.
You can't be serious, man. You cannot be serious!